Okay, so we should be live now. Hello, everybody. We are waiting for a couple of minutes to folks to join. If anyone wants to present yourselves, whatever introductions.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm RX14 on GitHub. Currently working on Windows support. Mainly been just for the last few days working on a few just on the issue tracker, but yeah, that's about it. I work on everything on the standard library, pretty much.
We can tell that. Okay. Don't be shy. You can.
Hey everyone. I'm Sedo, or Sardar, as you may already know. I'm mostly on this issue tracker, and I'm mostly going around talking about Crystal, doing evangelism stuff. And I also maintain Kamal here, so feel free to ask anything about it.
And I'm Brian. I work at Manas together with Mati. Luckily, thanks to all of the support, I am full-time Crystal developer right now from Manas, so that's really, really good for me. And well, I try to. It seems I like CI, although I don't, but I spend a lot of time on that. And I work a lot in the DB drivers, for example, and I am currently hoping to jump in the more core things of the language on the following weeks. So we'll talk about that sooner rather than later. Mati, do we have do you want to present yourself? I don't know if we have like a counter or how many people are online and watching us from this window to know when we should start.
I'm not sure if you have one. I have one. It says we have 32 people viewing us right now. So hello to everybody and thanks for joining. I'm Mati. I'm kind of part of the core team of Crystal. I work at Manas with Brian, and so yeah, we are 34 now. So people is coming here, but maybe we can start with some of the questions we have, and well, the stream will be online after we finish anyway. So feel free to see it again, go backwards, and send more questions for a new session we will do. I don't know, in 2 to 40 weeks or something like that. So I don't know if there is any of the questions you are like any of you guys want to start with. If not, we can pick like some random. Thanks everybody for the questions. They were like quite a bunch of them, really good ones. So I'm not sure if you want to pick some of them, guys. Or...
I can start with the first one that arrived. Okay. It was from Varun Batra, and the question was if there is a weight group like concept available, like from weight group from Go language, and actually it's not by that name, but so weight group is about like about running many routines in concurrency and waiting for all of them or the group that are involved in that weight group. You can achieve that through channels by signaling individually and just waiting for on a different Go routine to receive let's say K times a message from the channel. So there you can sync there. But there is a macro or a construct in the language that's called parallel, and that essentially does the same. That's that. Launch a bunch of routines in a concurrency way and wait for all of them to accomplish before going on the main fiber. So there are ways around. There is not exactly way group the way that you will find it. So it's just how you do it with channels and coding in this concurrency model in mind, or using the parallel macro, for example.
I do see a couple of places in the standard library where you could add a weight group. I think there should be, we could add an abstraction a little bit higher level over channels to add a weight group, which is pretty similar to Go's. And I see a couple of places in the standard library where that would be useful. So I think that's something to think about.
Together with other parallelism issues, I expect different patterns to appear, and Y group might be one of those. I don't have a full catalog of those, but yeah, that could appear.
Okay.
Okay, great. So that was done. I'm not sure, Serdar, you were talking about one of the questions. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question is: the Crystal team is sitting on top of a gold mine and still looking at the horizon. My big question for the core team would be: what is good enough for 1.0, and is good enough for Crystal? This is from Elias Perez. Well, the first statement, like we are staying on top of a gold mine, I think we are aware of that, and we are trying to, we are trying to be really good at satisfying those requirements to open up the gold mine and actually make Crystal ready for 1.0. And the question, the $1 million question, is that what's good enough for 1.0? I think parallelism and windows are the biggest stuff that needs to be in 1.0, and then we are going to refine the STD and some other parts, maybe improve concurrency and parallelism patterns like we just mentioned in the last question. But my point is that we are aware that Crystal is in a quite niche position, that it's really, like I go to conferences and speak to a lot of Rubyists and lots of other communities, and I can easily say that we are aware that we are being on, getting a lot of tractions, and most of the people just want a 1.0 already. But that's not that easy, and we are working hard to make it happen as soon as it's possible. But we hear you. Yeah.
I would like to add to what's needed for to be ready for 1.0. There are some sometimes underlying or invisible issues that hold us back if we want to do things a bit too serious. Sometimes people might say that for example, one of the concerns is that it's about incremental compilation, or the memory consumption of the compiler, or how to, if not incremental compiler, modular compilation, the different way to reduce the resources and to compile faster. That's a concern. The thing is that some of the language design features that we currently have goes against that idea, or at least it puts a limit of what can be achieved. So if we are eager and announce, hey, this is the language 1.0 with these semantics, although we could change a little bit the standard library and make some slightly breaking changes every now and then because there are things to be fixed, the core language shouldn't change that much. And for me, is trying to have a more safety vision about where the language one knows should how the language should look, and that might imply some slightly changes. So not to have right now a better compilation, but to be able to, and not put stoppers in the way to that. I do have some concrete examples of that, but sometimes it's not the most common things that you have in mind when you're writing your application to create the DB to run the web page. There's just some more slightly things that goes in there. Some might be macros, how they're interact, how is the support to DSLs, which I actually love that much, but there are some underlying things that put some limits to how the compiler could improve in the future if we release as is the language. I don't want it to change that much, but those are my main concerns on my side. Yeah.
And
somebody
to add
wants
to that, we know that v1.0 isn't going to be perfect. It's just a question of allowing v1.0 to be possible to improve to as close as perfect as we can get it. So it's just enabling certain improvements in the future and certain allowing us to be more flexible in the future about where we take the language, which is really important before we absolutely nail down the final what we have to support for the next 2, 3, 5, 10 possibly years. And as language maintainers, you have to be aware of the baggage that you're carrying along.
Yeah, I think we, well, here at the office and on the chat, wherever we, the question of the temptation to say, hey, let's just tag 1.0, the thing we have, it's everyone says it's good enough to be used, so let's just do that and that's it. But I don't know, it's not the way we like it to be, right? Like we want to I don't know, provide some kind of stability for it doesn't make any sense to release 1.0 and 2 weeks after that get to know that I don't know, we did something we have to change and we have to break everything and release 2.0 like in a month after 1.0. I don't think that's not the way we are trying to do things. We know tagging 1.0 may give some false sense of stability or whatever, but we owe to the community actually providing that stuff instead of faking it. So I think that's the reason we are waiting until we are sure about that, right? Like that's it. Okay. So I'm not sure if anyone else wants to add something to that. If not, we can move on. Here's a question: how does the core team plan to solve the high memory usage when compiling Crystal programs? Says Claudio.
Okay. Buying more RAM is definitely not the answer. Let's start with that. So it's not. We haven't reached any limit with any of the programs we currently have. The bigger program is the compiler itself, and it's able to build in the free infrastructure of the CIs, for example. So that's a practical limit. We are able to use it for 50K already. The compiler is. I think it's around 50 or 60 logs of code. We know for the first thing is not to increase too much the memory consumption. Every time we add things to the ASC, things start getting bigger. So we try to be careful with what's to be added on that. And then there were some weeks ago with Juan, we were discussing some ideas to do a somehow incremental compilation, but that might come after 1.0, and it requires some review of the language that I was mentioning before, especially around macros or semantic of DSLs to don't prevent caching or detecting what kind of things can be reused. In the short term, there were some ideas to maybe improve the time, not that much the memory consumption. So yeah, that will be a different answer. So not getting worse will be the first one, to not increase the high memory consumption, and maybe be sure to not abuse macros during the compilation. For example, some weeks ago, there was a PR about not using the class metadata during the macros expansion, because otherwise your nodes get duplicated across all the invocations. So there are some little tweaks that might be happen. That is the extent for now on my head regarding memory usage. For me, I must confess, it's not a big stopper right now. So that is as much as I get. Chris or Serdar, any other input regarding this?
The long-term solution for reducing memory usage is the same solution for reducing compile times, which is, I think, to reduce the number of instantiations of methods. And so that's the way, making a few language changes here and there to try and stuff like casting method arguments to their restrictions as they come into the method, I think will help. And that's discussed in one of the issues that we've had open for quite a while, that Ari opened a couple of months ago, or maybe a bit longer now. But yeah, there's a couple of solutions there. I'm not going to get too technical.
Yeah, it's always a balance. Yeah.
My 2 cents would be just avoid using too much macro magics. Like some Kemal users sometimes question me about high memory and really high compilation times, because they use lots of macros and lots of ECR templates. And yeah, most of the time, just avoid using too much macros for now, and eventually we will solve that.
Yeah, I think the high memory usage of the compiler itself is the price you have to pay for that, and the compilation time is the price you pay for getting like a language that does as much type infers as Crystal does, and all that. Like the magic you get, if not every single language on the earth would be doing this, right? So I'm not saying there's nothing we can do to improve the memory usage, but don't expect. I don't know. I think it's not wise to expect Crystal to use as few memory as other languages during compilation, right? You have to pay some price for getting stuff, so maybe that will be one of the things, right? Like,
yeah, Crystal has different trade-offs than most other languages in terms of compiler complexity, memory usage, and CPU usage of the compiler. So it's just one of those things. Crystal can definitely improve, but whether it can get close to other languages, I think it's always going to be a little bit of a trade-off.
Yeah, for me, the trade-off between compilation and runtime, you can have fast compile time and fast runtime. Like sometimes you will need to pay some price, and Crystal appears when we wanted to don't penalize the runtime for the program. So that means that during compile time, we will need some extra work to make the compiler do the math that you are not willing to do to expand a lot of code or to handle on runtime. it's always a trade-off.
Okay, great. Well, any news regarding parallelism? Asks Anti-Farben. Any news, Branch?
No, you call me Branch. Now everybody knows. Okay, yeah, my nickname in Manas is Branch. Okay, so my idea is after in a couple of I've been like researching some of the current state regarding parallelism, some of the work that was done some months ago, or actually a year ago, with Juan and Gustavo and Juan Eddy, which are the other guys in Manas that were involved in parallelism. The current they're still like in design, but what I will, from my personal opinion, what I would like to say is that the abstraction is still fibers and channels, and the users is abstracted from creating manually the threads. So the idea is that fibers will be able to schedule in a thread pool that when running the program, you should be able to pick or infer from the architecture which is the good amount of work pools, CPUs that you have in mind, and be able to run fibers from one to another. But if you start like digging deeper in that design, you will find some questions on the LLVM, for example, Juan asking about thread local storage issues regarding how to keep the information consistent, because if one fiber is scheduling one thread and then appears on the other, what happened with certain thread local storage variables. So there are some nasty things to solve there, or at least to make a design that is able to run in this architecture, although one will think that you could be more performant. But the thing is that the overall design, I think it's this: you code in fibers and you don't see threads manually. That will be my choice of how to deal with parallelism, but not at the cost of losing what we have today. So I will personally would like to still have a way to compile programs that will run in single thread versus multiple threads, and don't penalize the single thread for having to deal with a thread pool. Because that's what we currently have, and some of the performance that we are having, like the good performance, is because we don't need a lot of synchronization between threads, because there are not, right? So I don't think we should lose that, although we should enable to use a multiple core, and as Go is using, don't share too much state to communicate, but communicate by blah, 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 all that mantra of Go, that it makes actual sense. So I think the design should be there, and after, like in the short term, I will be trying to work on this, and hopefully having some discussion and trying actual things and gathering feedback from that. Although, yeah, maybe it won't be the best performance at the first time, but if we don't have anything, we can improve. So I will expect to have something, not in the next release, but eventually in the 2 or 3 releases. I would like to have some story about parallelism there somehow. But it will be challenging for me, I assure. So we will need to work together to get that story done. That's from my side.
Great. Is this one of the things you're like about to work on, like maybe on the not for the next release, but it's like on schedule, right? Something like that?
Yeah. After, if we want to talk about my schedule, I am working currently of implementing overflowing on integers, because I cannot deal with the thing that we can do math in a secure way. There were some stories around time, around money. You want to add, and you want to be sure that the number means what it does. So I am working on that, because it's like my my computer science degree doesn't allow me to go any further without that. But then the main thing is to start working on parallelism. I have been like trying to work in parallel, but there's no commit yet to be achieved. But after that, yes, I should start working on that. Not paying too much attention in the standard library, but more about the parallelism story. I will try to focus on that.
Awesome. Okay. Well, just I just wanted to thank the folks at 84 Codes for their support. Like thanks to their donations and everyone on Bounty Services that we can get Brian to like be dedicated like full time to improving Crystal. So we hope parallelism gets done. Thanks to all of the contributions. So that's it. I'm not sure, Sardar, you want to?
I just one thing to say. Actually, we had a branch called thread local or thread next or something, and I used to compile Crystal with parallelism support back in 0.21 or something. And I believe that there's a wiki page on how you can actually compile and run your programs in parallel mode and see the effect on the throughput. But I did with some production application, and the throughput was not that good. So it works in theory, and you can compile the branch with the previous releases, but currently you can't compile it with the latest release of Crystal. But you can check the code, it's there, but it's been like 1 year old or something and haven't been updated.
Yeah, I've been going through that code a little bit and checking which are the different experiments that were tried. So yeah, it was one year old already, and some of the questions that arise haven't been answered yet. There are some ideas to don't penalize the runtime that much, but yeah, that is as much as it gets.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a tracking issue for listing all of the have the discussion about the design and all that in the open. I think it'll provide something which we can point to show how the work is going on. I think that'd be a good idea. Kind of write up what's been done so far, what the issues are, and yeah, get the design out there.
Yeah, the hardest part is that it's usually with that implies how system calls are called, how to the garbage collector interact, how external library can be used. It's like all or nothing. So one answer points to a whole different design to another. It's different. It's really hard to compare different alternatives. But yeah, as always, exposure is and clarification is something good, and it's something we are always trying to improve. I have my notebook here with all the design issues, but it doesn't go through email. Okay, let's move on to the next one.
Do we have an update of Crystal's roadmap? Says Carlos Donderis. I think that's one of the things we might do, like soon or something like that. I don't think we have actually updated the roadmap. We have written one like ages ago, and
yeah, we don't have a timeline for, but we have the order. Like we are going on some of the semantics of the language, and then we are going to parallelism, which are like somehow are the two priorities to define the language. There was a lot of work around distributions during the last weeks, and Chris is doing marvelous job for Windows. So together with that, I think that's the order of how is the roadmap in the midterm. then there is the story about stripping out some part of the language that might be a bottleneck for the future, but that doesn't seem to attract so much attention right now. So no strict days, but we will like to have as I mentioned, the overflow pretty soon, the samperism story during the following months. I would like to see that at least in the initial state, and try to improve from there.
Good. Anyone else?
No, I'm just I'm going to say I'm going to be working on. I've done quite a bit of work for getting Windows working, Windows support working over the last 6 months or so, and I'm going to be working pretty much full time on that from now on, because it's my summer holidays, because I'm a university student, so I'm busy most of the year. But I should be able to get quite a lot of velocity going on that, and maybe even next release, a significant portion of Windows might be usable. No promises, of course, but progress is good.
Good. Okay. Okay, so Carlos Donderis also asked if we have to get Windows support and parallelism in the roadmap for 1.0. He asked if we think that we should keep focusing on the standard library, or getting on the other hard stuff or things like that. If we think that's right to keep spending time on the standard library. And I think we have another related question. Well, you can start about that. I'll try to find the other questions who are on the same line. Not sure.
So I think that addition to the standard library is always great, but not every single idea fits in the standard library, because the bigger the standard library gets, the more things needs to maintain, and the more coupled you are to certain release or certain current state of the standard library. I like that the standard library comes with everything that you usually will need nowadays for an application, but it's not that all the structures should have all the operations. That is my personal opinion. That's what I like from the standard library of some of the languages, that you don't need to use a lot of external packages. So focusing on the standard library and checking that there are not bug fixing is always welcome. There's been a huge amount of changes in the release to come soon, in a couple of hours, hopefully. Time zone issues, HTTP, the files, and for sure all the Windows support. But there have been a lot of changes on the standard library, and they should be stabilized somehow. I'm not sure, just speaking out loud, I'm not sure how will be a good idea to, we will say that we want to have a stable version of the standard library, to review the standard library. I don't know if a good idea to do that is to mark certain classes or methods as stable and others don't mark it as stable, and be sure what can break and what cannot break from 1.0. That's one of the idea I will choose to use it, but I haven't discussed it with anybody. We have annotations now, so we can do that from annotations in docs, and you can use that. But then if there are some experience regarding multi-threading or Windows or even design languages, you are happy to join in some conversation. This is hard to know how the experience of each of one to collaborate on those issues, but I'm open to have discussion around any of the things of the languages. Sometimes it's hard to speak to new people regarding things that you have been working for so long and reach new opinions. So I as I always said, is about what is your preference area of working, either HTTP, either parsing things, either doing lexers or parsers or compiling. You can collaborate on your preferences. You don't need to sacrifice or to pick. I think that whatever you like most is the best thing you can do to collaborate to Crystal, either as a separate shard or in the standard library to get bigger the ecosystem.
Some things I'd like to add. Most of the standard library changes that have been added recently have been added by outside contributors. So saying that we're focusing on the standard library isn't entirely correct, because we're just mainly merging stuff that other people have been pull requesting in. And another thing is that in the process of me porting to Windows, that requires it requires reviewing parts of the standard library. So a lot of the focus on the standard library has been necessary to provide Windows support. So I think that's a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other question I was looking for was also from Carlos, saying if we are considering to improve the compiler internals documentations, so folks people from outside the core team can also chime in and maybe send some pull requests, have a bit more abstraction there. So yeah, I'm not sure if well, I do recall Ari trying to teach me and everyone here how to do stuff on the compiler itself, and I don't know, I just didn't get it, but we could certainly try to improve that documentation a bit, or maybe, I'm not sure. Yeah, I think it's as always, it's a matter of resources, time, and effort being spent in things. We can do stuff, or we can improve the docs to hopefully get someone to join us doing stuff. But we can do both at the same time. So it's, I don't know, we should prioritize somehow. And well, for now we are trying to do stuff. Maybe we can, if anyone is interested in, like, if anyone goes into that and improves the documentation, that would be awesome. We could try to do that also, but well, I think it's not happening right now. I don't know if, what do you think?
Some parts of the compilers are documented itself through the code, but they doesn't appear in the documentation or as in the Crystal book for people to jump in, because it's not the main API. So if you want to deal with the compiler, I will say that you can see some of the PRs that adds features to the languages, like the annotation, like adding, there is a pull request going on to make the exhaustive check through the case or whatever language construct we end up picking. Those are great resources to learning all the, at least where should the code be for different things, either for adding language construct to adding optimizations. But it is documented at some level. The people that had already contributed to the compiler didn't receive any class about how the computer is written. Make Now Just is one of the most contributors to the compiler's internal, but there are others contributors that have already jumped and start making little tweaks to there. There were some talks. It depends. Adding something to the language might be through the binary representation of the structure, to dealing with LLVM, or to just changing AST's nodes to represent certain constructs and then transforming to another low-level construct, and you don't need to deal with low-level stuff. So it's a huge task. So that's why I say that maybe jumping through a PR is a great resource to start digging into the compiler. Nowadays, in the compiler comes with some tools. Each time you add a language construct, you need to affect the formatter or the syntax highlighter, because otherwise everything looks broken. So you have the whole story end to end. But there's no, I will say that it's not set in the roadmap to have a better documentation of the internals, especially because one of our mission is to have a semantic of the language clear, not necessarily the internal of the language stable. Like the compiler itself could change. The main important thing is that the semantics and the syntax is stable. So that's where things got decoupled. But for sure, if you have questions or you're trying to implement some idea, we can discuss it and we can point through GitHub where is the compiler code for that, or what are the affected parts. That is as much as it gets, I think. I don't know. Serdar or Chris, do you want to add something?
Just one minor thing, but I believe also picking up a small issue, like an easy one about the compiler and trying to fix that would be a great starter to get to dive into the Lexer and the parser first, and then you move to the compiler internals. But I can say that the Crystal compiler is really easy to read. It's just too big. That's why it seems a bit scary. But Ari once told me that a compiler is also a program, so you shouldn't be scared. So just don't be shy and jump into some random compiler file and read it. And since the compiler itself and the Lexer, everything is handwritten, it's pretty much readable. But making sense out of it is another story. But to be honest, just pick an issue and just stay in that context and make it work, and somehow it gets better.
Yeah, I think you just need to jump in. I'm certainly guilty of shying away from compiler work, but I've done a little bit, but not very much.
Yeah, someone said in the past that actually a compiler is easier than web applications, because on compiler you just read files, manipulate some structures, and emit some other files, which is far more easier than databases and maps. And I don't know if everybody knows who said that, but he's been around in the language quite a long time.
Okay. Here we have Vilenga and Sergi Macri Denkov. Sorry for me reading names. What are the plans of having an incremental compilation working? Do we?
As said before, I think it's not a priority to have it right now. It's a priority to try to not to put stoppers on that story in the long term.
Okay.
I don't know. I could mention one of the things that got there. For example, the macros. Right now, since they are interpreted, they need to be interpreted the whole from top to bottom. And that means that you need to go through all the files to load them. And it's hard to pick one file and say, hey, what will generate this file despite all the other contexts? You cannot have that because the macros are so depending one on the other. They have state. You have mutable constants in macros, which is a weird concept to have a mutable constant, but you have that. We have that. So they're not stateless. How you can the interpretation of that is something that got in that will got in the middle if we want to go through incremental compilation as performant as we would like. Yeah, we can reach certain level of incremental compilation, but that is something that arises pretty soon. Yeah.
Okay.
And there are others, but let's move on.
Okay. Any plans on extending macros to include the whole language and not just a subset? I don't see that happening, right? Like, not sure you can do that stuff without writing a new language.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I will say that slightly the opposite. I want to remove things from the macro, not to add them. But it's always a balance. I already mentioned the chop thing that I don't like right now about macros. I don't know if Christoph Serdar has any other input regarding their experience, like this shouldn't be here or.
I feel like macros are just okay for me, but it really depends. I especially don't like the escaping stuff, and we introduced something called verbatim blocks for that kind of purpose, but I'm not sure. Like it's okay, but I feel like there is still room for improvements for macros, but I don't feel like we need a fully compatible crystal subset language for macros. I believe it's okay.
I don't really have any input on that. There's certainly some features which the mutable constants enable, which that we'd have to find some. There are some use cases which I think would be hard to do without mutable constants, so we'll have to be a bit careful around that. But apart from that, I think it's just incremental improvements. Make them a bit nicer instead of throw them out and try and make something which is closer to crystal proper.
Yeah. Yeah. Next, Matti, I think.
Yeah, sure. We have here Livrepunk. Sorry, there's a Russian name there. I can't read it at all. Sorry about that. Do you have any plans to enable static compiling by default?
I don't think we're going to enable static compilation by default for quite a long time. The main language which is known for the static compilation is Go, and Go does its static compilation by essentially starting from scratch and rewriting all of the base libraries of the system in Go from a clean slate, essentially. And that's a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of money to be able to get that done and stable. And it's just not something that is on our roadmap right now. I think in the future it would definitely be possible post 1.0 to do that, but I think that's something that's going to be pretty far down the road. In terms of static compilation, without rewriting libc in Crystal, what would be required for Go levels of static compilation, I think the best way forward would be to provide some standard tooling around static compilation, because it's already pretty easy to do static compilation inside a Docker container with Alpine Linux in. And that's currently how we make our statically compiled Crystal compiler binaries. And so extending the tooling around that, making some official tools perhaps for that, I think would provide a lot more benefit for a lot less cost than going any other route for static compilation.
I pretty much agree with Chris here. Not much to add. It's his realm.
Yeah. Windows static compilation is something I haven't looked into, and for Mac OS it's a lot harder. I think with Mac OS, I think you'd end up having a dynamically linked binary which was statically linked to everything except the libc. But that would require some tooling and fiddling with LD flags, and that's something to work out and generate tooling and scripts for. I think really the challenge there is to take the existing tools, as I said, and package them up into something nice and official and robust. Because I think you already can do close to static compilation on most platforms already. It's just difficult, and we need to make it easier with scripts and tools.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something the community can work on if they want, because there's quite a bit for their core team to be doing. It's hard to allocate time.
Yeah, great. Well, great. Okay, so Ben Dietze is asking. Okay, Brian is talking about his next step, the arithmetic integer overflow. He's asking what's bad in Crystal right now that you are trying to fix.
Yeah, that there is no overflow. Basically, you once you add a plus b, you are not sure if the result is a plus b because there is no overflow. There are certain scenarios where you don't care because you are doing modulo operations, so it's okay to flip around and go through negatives or to whatever binary representation you're using. But on a lot of cases, you do want to have the overflow. In Crystal, as in C, for example, all the integers operation goes on a certain domain, on 32 bits, 64 bits, or whatever. On a different side, on Ruby, you have infinite precision. You have infinite big decimals or big integer by default. So that's not necessarily an issue on there, but we do, because we are more towards C in that area. So the design I'm working right now, it's more similar to what is being done in C#. Actually, you are able to declare if you care or you explicitly don't care about the overflow, to have a checked or unchecked sections of code, and that will either produce an overflow exception or just work as it currently does, just going around and going through the negatives number. And that might be okay to you. And so that's the design working. So you will be able to probably change if you care or not about overflow in a general way, but in certain part of the applications, you will say, I do care here. I do want to have an overflow check for the arithmetic operations. So that's why I am working on that. Probably I think that the language should be safe first. So maybe in the next version it will still keep the current behavior, but on the second next version, I think that the overflow check should be turned by default. This is again, I haven't shared these thoughts to anybody. It's just I'm trying to work and see how the things feels to me, and then share the overall results. But I do think that the overflow should be on by default. Like when you divide by 0, right? You want an exception for that. Why you will do it like for additions. That is the top thing with arithmetic. There are others, but that's the most bugging things for me. I want to add integers and know that the result is accurate. Yeah, so that is about what is wrong. But everybody's using it despite that. So you didn't knew it's great.
Yeah. Just pay attention if you are getting really, really rich. You don't want to have like modulo account balance. But
let's have one more donation. Now you're negative.
Oh my God. Okay. Here, Faustino Aguilar says, what do you think about writing a Crystal language specification? I think someone had offered someone offered to do that for maybe like a research for school or something like that. Do you recall something about that, Brian?
I recall, some of our colleagues that is doing research in formal methods about wanting to do a formal verification of the compiler. But there was also the idea about having a Crystal specification, like a document where someone could refer to despite the specs or the current Crystal compiler status. I think it will be a great addition, but not on if you are going to jump into trying to write a spec. The first question is how that spec can be consumed. How can we check that the compiler itself is complying to that spec? So it needs to be. It doesn't need to be just a document. It needs to be think as an asset that you can verify and test and decide where the language wants to go, not necessarily what it is right now. I think it will be a valuable asset, but we are not planning to do that right now. Right now, the specification is the compiler itself. Is not the best thing to do. It's not the more formal, definitely. But it's go through the nature of Crystal that started like as an experiment to see if there is a comfortable language enough that could be compiled through the LLVM and all the things that we are doing that will make us happy to code it. So we're not thinking, but if someone wants to start digging on how to do that, my first input is how we can consume that specification and run tests or somehow some tooling around to know if that is the expected behavior or not. Yeah. So someone has other thoughts around that or other wishes if someone in the community wants to do a formal spec verification of Crystal? No. Okay. Let's move on.
Good. For here, Hugo Queiroz Sabonicio asks, what kind of applications do you guys currently use Crystal for? I'm not sure if you, Chris and Serdar, if you have any examples. We certainly have some of them. But,
yeah. So we use at work at Rainforest do some HTTP services, microservices. Planning on implementing something bigger for virtualization stuff. And I also use Crystal for command line utilities. It's also great for that. And if you are munching a lot of data processing, like doing like ETL stuff, parsing CSVs, writing that into DB, or doing some heavy calculation, especially financial ones. That's also good. And I used to do that, and I can say that Crystal is pretty good at those kind of stuff. Yeah.
Good. Well, here at Manas, we have we are dog fooding Crystal by developing our own accounting system, internal accounting tool, whatever. That's done on Crystal itself. I had to, a couple of months ago, I had to like upgrade it for. There have been like maybe 3 or 4 new Crystal releases since the last time we have updated it, and the migration path was like, it's amazing. I fall in love with the language just once again. It was like, oh, well, these guys are doing like pretty cool stuff. So yeah, we have done. Our salaries depend on Crystal working. And I'm not sure if we had any other projects. We have developed a test chatbot server. Or well, we have another. We have a Brium project that accounts hours for billing to our clients, and that has a Slack connector done in Crystal. And I don't know if we have anything else, Brian.
No, mostly the bots and this application that manage our cash flows and emits invoices to our clients. Awesome stuff. Now we have been doing some experiments to replace some endpoints for performance issues, but they didn't. They didn't go to production at the end because of other unrelated issues, mainly budgets of the project, not of the technology. But we did some breach about mimicking active record, JSON deserialization, emitting directly through the streaming to not allocate too much memory. That was some stories around. What about Chris? Do you have been using Crystal or?
I have a few things. I don't work at a company, of course, so obviously all of the stuff that I'm building in Crystal is for myself. But there was one. I wrote a replacement for. It's an SSL proxy. It takes HTTP requests. Okay, so the problem is that you have web pages, and you're linking. It's sort of a web pages with user-generated content, and so users can embed images with arbitrary URLs into the web page. And of course, you're serving the web page over HTTPS, and some of these URLs are HTTP, and the browser won't let you access HTTP resources from an HTTPS web page. So you need an application which receives. It's essentially a proxy which responds on HTTPS and returns you, fetches the image with HTTP and returns you the image over HTTPS. So it's a little secure proxy which all of the image requests for, in this case, it was a forum, go through that. It's a drop-in replacement for another project called Camo. So I think I called it camo.cr. And that's been up for 4 or 5 months, just no intervention, completely just works. I had some issues before, I'll admit that, where it would keep crashing for undebuggable reasons, but I upgraded Crystal. something got fixed there, and then it's been working absolutely smooth sailing ever since, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I have to admit, I'm using it on a forum for a university, whatever, a non-official forum we have, and we deployed it like on maybe January, February, and it's working since then. So yeah, it's great, really great work, and it works like flawless. It's
Yeah.
really
Nice
good.
to know that someone else is using my code.
Yeah, yeah, sure. It's awesome stuff. Yep.
Yeah, I also remember we deployed a service like 1 or some year ago, and it's still up with no issues. And also, we just deployed a new service like 2 weeks ago or something, and it's been up without any hiccups. And GC is doing a pretty good job there, and it's serving a lot of requests, like more than 100 requests per second. And it's just, the stack is at 3 megabytes or something. And that's a great thing about Crystal. Once you deploy, it's mostly okay, and you don't have to restart like you would do in Ruby. And that's a great thing. I really like it.
There's another one I forgot. It's another image. It's a file proxy, which I've got a big bunch of files on Backblaze B2. It's a cloud storage service, which is like AWS S3, but cheaper, essentially. So there's about 500 gigabytes of arbitrary files in B2, and I need B2 is actually quite slow, so it's an application which has sort of a 50 gigabyte cache of those files from B2, and it just serves them over HTTP. So you request a file, if it's not in the cache, it brings it down, caches it, and occasionally evicts stuff from the cache to keep it under 50 gigs. And that's also been working fine. I had to write the B2 library myself, but apart from that, it's been great. Just really stable, no issues. It's great. I'm really surprised about how stable Crystal is. Well, once it's compiled.
There was another question regarding like which applications it's being done with Crystal. It's about like will it make sense to focus on a specific niche, at least in terms of marketing for Crystal. I'm thinking of Crystal as being the language for fast microservices. That was asked by Fueguito. I think it's related to what we have discussing right now. I have seen. I'm not a professional in marketing, definitely. It's not my area. First of all, definitely microservices is a nice use of Crystal, because if you don't want to deal with all the ecosystem around web applications, but you still need to do web applications, like microservices are something that fits over there. But there are some development for some people that like to do game applications. CLIs it's also a great fit for Crystal, because you can program really fast, really happy, but you don't need to boot all the interpreter of another language to do some manipulation with files. So CLIs are really fast. Microservices are really, really good. The the microservices push the story about database access, HTTP clients, integration with services. So that's really great to focus on microservices. But I wouldn't narrow Crystal being used only for that. Something that I would like to happen to the Crystal book, at least, is to have a section right after the installation, to have like different areas or on how to jump in if you want to make a microservices, make a web application, make a CLI, make a game, make different kind of applications. So you have a more or less an introduction going through the area that you want. I think that will help from adoption, not necessarily for marketing. But if you come to Crystal and say, hey, I want to do this application that is essentially a game or a ETL application or a microservices, you at least have one further step after installing the compiler to what to do. I think that will really benefit, and that will be a great addition for the documentation, and maybe even to the homepage, as like, what are you trying to do with Crystal? Then follow this guide, and at least you have a hello world of that source. That will make sense for me. Again, not in terms of marketing. In terms of marketing, I don't know. We are happy of all the bounty source contribution that keep us the things moving forward.
Yeah,
I'd like to mention that. Sorry, Chris. I'd like to mention that we have a startup running on Crystal, and they are doing AI ML stuff, and they're fully using Crystal in production. So the thing is that actually Crystal is a pretty good overall language to do a lot of stuff. And I know that that company is processing like hundreds of gigabytes of data with Crystal, and they claim that they are gaining like more than 10 times performance compared to Ruby and other dynamic languages. And the thing is that that shows us Crystal has a lot of application areas other than just web frameworks and game stuff. So AI and ML is a pretty good example of that. And I believe they have published their open source ML language, which is written in Crystal, and it should be on GitHub called Shinet or something. So if you're interested in what other peoples are doing with Crystal, especially other than web stuff, you can check that library and see that they are doing some really interesting stuff already. Yeah.
Yeah, I just checked this. The folks at Neuralition, they have open source this Shinet, so shout to them. You can go and check the project. Yeah, we have there are like a lot of. I don't think there's a specific niche. Maybe in a couple of years' time, Crystal becomes I don't know, a bit of what Ruby has become, like that's the Rails language you use to to develop web applications, but you also have like a lot of other use cases. So I don't see, or at least we haven't found a specific niche. I think it's a pretty good language to do. It has really good fits for some use cases, and it's a very good language also for general developing. So I don't know. Time will say what the community, maybe that's something that the community marks more than the language itself. Sometimes you get the community to get interested in something, and everyone starts walking the same path, and you get, I don't know, all the Python is a great language for machine learning. It's probably more. It's more a feature of the community than the language itself, right? You also can help by the language design, but it's, after all, it's people doing stuff, not not the language doing things, right? Okay, we are about an hour and 15 minutes. I'm not sure if you want any other question to answer, or we can call it a day and maybe keep some stuff for the next session. I'm not sure if any other questions you want to talk about. Yeah.
There are two questions. One is about there are of different topics, but the same question is regarding the parallelism story and the overflow check. How much penalty we could expect from both with respect to the current scenario, especially because in parallelism we are lock free because only one thing can happen at a time. That was asked by John Egeland, or sorry if I pronounce it wrong. And the other was the custom performance about adding overflow check, that was asked by Christian Molina. The answer for both is almost the same. I wouldn't expect to have a penalty with respect to current behavior if you shift off, toggle off that feature. So if you compile with single-threaded, I don't want to add penalty with respect to current behavior, or not that much. And the overflow check, if you don't want overflow check in most of your application, you should be fine. If you add overflow check, there is a slight overhead, but we will end up using the intrinsic of LLVM, that when you ask to add numbers, it returns the number and a Boolean telling if it's overflowing or not. And if that Boolean is true, you raise an exception in the crystal land. That's mostly the design. And on parallelism, yeah, the multi-threaded needs to have some synchronization mechanism, although depending on the structures we will end up using, we might try to remain lock-free on certain areas, not at all probably, because you need to synchronize the garbage collector or the queues for the workers. But again, if we use single thread, I will expect not penalty at all, because I want to keep that performance. That's the hope.
And of course, if you do enable parallelism, you obviously want the overhead there to be pretty small as well. Otherwise, you're doing two cores for what you can. You're using two cores for what you can do on a single core without. So obviously, you don't want to. We need some performance optimizations there.
Yeah, definitely, and there some experiments are also always useful. For example, I have read on some products, like it's best performance if you run this web server that is run by Node on without, like in single threaded, but you reuse ports. It's more performant than if you fork or something. I have read on some products that kind of thing. So yeah, we want to reduce the penalty as much as possible. But well, we need to code first and see where we go. Definitely, we need to reduce that as much as possible. Okay. Okay. Any other?
There are some questions on the chat that's still being asked. There is one from Jeremy, like, how does the core team decide what peg to take crystal in? And I think we answered that before, right? Like, how do we decide? And he mentions that sometimes we have disagreements, and how we actually solve them and how we move on. Brian?
Well, we are in disagreement sometimes. That happen because we are different people. There's not, let's say, if someone says no, that is strong. So unless you roll back that no and you accept, there is still a thing to discuss. We have the rule of having at least 2 thumbs up explicit somewhere in the Wikipedia. But as we are like different persons, we need to talk. There is some. We need to mature on what is the direction of crystal, of what is the idioms that we want to see on the crystal. And I think that is one of the reasons why that, for example, why there isn't a lot of people right now in the core team. We can't get there are many contributors really active, and they're great contributors, and I will be maybe in the future they could jump in as core team also, as happened with Servat, with Chris, with Julian, and with John. But that needs to happen eventually when we start agreeing more. before the core team, when the core team was always inside Manas, we had a lot of discussions about which is the best thing to do. But that discussion didn't happen on GitHub. It just happened on the whiteboard. So it's not that it's too much different as before. Although in the previous state, where we're all like coworkers, we were able to talk every day about this and discuss with different moments, like have time to analyze things and to think. But now all the discussion happens on GitHub, or most of the discussion happen on GitHub, and they're written. So that maybe changed a little bit of the feelings of that. But the discussion have always been there. Sometimes not as public and stateful as right now.
Yeah, I'd like to say, in terms of issue conflict resolution, it really is kind of what you see on GitHub is pretty much all that happens. There's not much talk behind the scenes technically about the future of the language. It's really just we want all this stuff to be public, so and for the community to be able to input their views as well, because of course the core team, although we have the final say, we obviously want to incorporate what the community think about the language as well. So we try and keep it open and keep the discussion on GitHub so that everyone can join in. And yeah, we do tend to be quite, if someone says no from the core team, we do tend to take those concerns quite seriously and discuss about it until we come to a consensus.
While we are talking about GitHub, someone asked if we are actually have thought about moving from GitHub since it's bought by Microsoft recently. And my answer is that GitHub is just good enough, and migrating to another platform is currently not an option, and it's also resources. So I think GitHub is fine, and I really like how GitHub handles the PRs and the comments and the conversation, considering the other options are, yeah. What do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I think moving away from GitHub would be like we should invest some time into that, and until we see any issues that, let's say, we are probably using GitHub as long as we think it's the best option for doing the job, right? So up until now, it has been like the best place for Crystal to grow, and as long as that doesn't change, I don't see a reason to move out of there. I know there has been, well, we all are in the developing world, so we have been the last maybe 2 weeks have been like kind of fun regarding the news, but I don't know, until we have any, we have to wait and see what happens, if something happens at all, and then we will like make our move whenever it's time, and not before then, right? Like, I'm not sure what do you think about it, but
yeah, as a product and as a platform, GitHub it was chosen as the more comfortable through the last years for Baz at Manas, for Crystal, and if that change, or if that's makes in the middle for the community to grow, we could rethink that. But right now, I don't have any motivations to move out from GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I definitely have concerns about Microsoft and GitHub, but I don't think we're going to be moving away from GitHub for quite a while. There would need to be quite a concrete reason to make the move, because making the move, GitHub has quite a big network effect. It also it has a lot of people who are comfortable using it. A lot of people gets you more visibility, more contributors, more people looking at your code. It really is the standard, and as much as you may not like it, it's the world we live in. And until that changes, and I think we are going to see some changes in that area. Until that changes, I think we're best to wait and see.
Great. Yeah. I do have my own personal fears and concerns. I think kind of that's what happens with changes, right? Like everything's working. Whenever you have a change to face, you always have some kind of fear, and it's Microsoft that we recall what Microsoft has been for like a lot of years. So yeah, we're going to, but for now, I don't see a reason. Whenever we see one, it's definitely open to be changed. But I wouldn't spend much time right now on thinking about that. Whenever time comes, we should probably discuss it. But I don't think now is the time, right? Yep, go
on. There is also another from Jack Thorne. Like he says that I have seen some benchmarks that Crystal is fast, and some benchmarks mostly it's not fast. So he asked, "What do you think about Crystal is that?" So that kind of benchmarks really dependent on the that you are using. So, for example, for CPU intensive benchmarks, Crystal is in a really good place, and I think we have a repo. Someone made a benchmark repo only benchmarking CPU wall times. We are pretty good at that. But if you include, for example, DB drivers and that kind of stuff, we are not that good, because that relies upon some other stuff, some other libraries. And for example, it's been already asked that how about DB drivers, and I feel like DB drivers need more love from community and need more contributors, because most of the benchmarks, for example, in the recent Tech Empower web framework benchmarks, all of the Crystal frameworks performed the same kind of results. And I believe that it's because of the DB drivers, because the Crystal implementation is far more better than the frameworks in some benchmarks. I believe that's because of the DB drivers and some kind of optimizations we need to do in the frameworks. But overall, Crystal is at something in between if you include the ecosystem and the existing libraries. But if you are talking about just the raw performance, I can easily say that it's pretty good. So you need to take the benchmark with the environment and with the context that's it's being executed.
In terms of a quick summary of Crystal performance, I'd say single-threaded CPU performance, we're pretty close to see within. We're usually within. We're usually pretty close to C. I/O performance, we're usually pretty good at. We just need parallelism is the main performance main performance problem that Crystal has right now, and obviously we're going to get that done before 1.0. And then after that, it's just maturity of the ecosystem and the level of optimization that's put into library code in Crystal shards and stuff. We have a good, strong technical foundation to become even faster than we already are. And I think Crystal is plenty fast for real-world applications as it is right now. We're definitely better than Ruby and Python at pretty much any workload that you can throw at Crystal. And just one quick question. Someone asked for Crystal on ARM status. It's already supported, so nothing to do there. Just need to maybe get CI working on ARM, but apart from that, it's already pretty good.
Okay, great. Well, we are hitting an hour and a half, so we can call it a day. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. Thank you guys for joining the session. And as always, thank you to you, the whole Crystal community, the contributors, both in code and in sponsorship. Thanks to 84 Codes for their support once again. And let's see you in the next Q&A session or whatever. So thanks for joining, and see you, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.